All right. Welcome in, everybody, to the championship weekend recap version of the Hot Read podcast. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of all things published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. Appreciate everybody tuning in with us here around 9:54 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon. Hope everybody's well. Hope you had a great weekend. And we are going to be talking all things championship weekend in the NFL. It was an interesting one, to say the very least. And I'm excited to be joined by those of you that are listening to the show live via Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. We appreciate everybody being in here. We've got quite a bit to talk about here real quick, and we're going to be doing a live recording of the show via this live podcast. So for those of you joining us, I would appreciate you guys leaving me any and all questions that you have via the live chat function on the YouTube page. Now, if you're listening via Facebook or Twitter, you can't leave a comment via those social media platforms, right? So I need you to go over to BroadwaySportsMedia.com, or excuse me, so sorry, Broadway Sports Media on YouTube, the Broadway Sports Media YouTube page. Leave a comment on the Broadway Sports Media channel, which you can subscribe to and get all of the Hot Read podcasts there and live via our podcast platform of choice, which is YouTube, as well as wherever you get your podcast, whether it's on YouTube, Amazon, Apple, Spotify. There's many ways you can get the podcast, and we appreciate you listening. But via video podcast, you can only get it on YouTube, and we appreciate you listening. And if you're listening to us live, we appreciate you leaving us your comments, questions, reviews yourself. Give us your thoughts on the two games that we saw today. That would be very helpful, and it will allow us to get into today's games, which we're going to address here in earnest here in just a moment, as I prepare to do a rather short but brief version of the podcast, which we're recording for Monday morning. That's when it typically comes out. We'll be recording it here in just a moment. But if you have a question and you're listening live, I would be very appreciative of any questions that you might have, any comments you might have. I'd appreciate you, because I don't have producer JT with me today. Anything you have to input on today's episode, which is going to be purely a Titans news and championship round recap of the football events that we saw go on today. If you have any thoughts on those two topics, please leave us a comment, a review via our YouTube page, Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. You can go to the live stream of this podcast, of this live stream. You can leave comments, and it'd be very helpful to me, allow me to interact with any listeners that we might have. So here in just a moment, I'm going to make sure that we are recording and go live for that. But I'm going to real quick make sure we have all of our retweets. And if you are listening, by the way, much appreciated if you wouldn't mind retweeting and liking or reposting if you're on Facebook, or tweeting out the YouTube link if you happen to be on Facebook. That will allow us to get as many people in here as possible. And it's going to allow us to go through today's episode rather quickly. Pretty short one, actually, probably the shortest hot read podcast you've ever listened to in terms of episodes of this show, because producer JT, once again, is not with me. He will be back with us on probably Wednesday, but at the very least on Friday's show. Kind of a weird week for us. We've got plans for Wednesday's show, for Friday's show, probably some plans for a Saturday show, depending on how things go. The Senior Bowl in Birmingham is going on this week and this weekend, so that's going to change kind of how we approach the week and how we plan out our shows. But I wanted to make sure, in the interest of getting a show up every single day that it is promised for you guys, I wanted to make sure there's a show for Monday morning, and that's what the live stream today is for. Making sure we can get a show in reaction to the championship weekend of shows that we had, or weekend of games that we had. Here just a moment ago, we had the Chiefs and the Bengals finish out their game, and that was certainly exciting. I am making sure and kind of stalling, to be honest with you, to make sure we get everybody in here. If anybody is listening live and happens to be able to go to our YouTube page and leave a comment letting me know that you can hear us. That would be very helpful. I am getting my thoughts organized here for our live show, which will be probably 15 to 30 minutes long here in just a moment. But before we get to that, I am stalling and making sure we've got everybody in here and all of our notes ready to go. This is for the January. Are there 30 days in January? I guess it is. Yeah. In the January 30th episode of the Hot Read podcast, we're reacting to the divisional round of the NFL, or excuse me, the championship round of the NFL playoffs. And I have some thoughts that I have organized here on YouTube ready for us to go. Let me just collect those here. But again, if you are listening to us live and you are able to leave a comment, I would be very appreciative of you doing so. If you're listening to us live and you're able to retweet or like or repost this episode wherever you found it on social media, that would be much appreciated. And it will help us get this episode on as many eyeballs as we can, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any thoughts on how Championship Sunday went, if you have any questions on the Titans, or really anything, any questions. I'm accepting any questions today. It's very late on a Sunday night. I'm a little bit buzzed, to be honest. Stony with a response. Thank you, Stony. Much appreciated. Easton, is too late for this to go to bed. Stony, I would love to. I debated with my team here on the Hot Read podcast whether or not this episode was even necessary. And based on the fact that we want to get an episode out every time that we're promising an episode, which is every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday for the next couple of months, it is important to me that we have an episode out. So I appreciate everybody tuning in that may be here, including you, Stony. And I'm not happy about being here, but I am happy about having an opportunity and a platform to talk about the Titans and more importantly, the championship weekend that we just watched. So that is going to be the main topic of focus here today. And if you have any questions, again, like Stony, you can leave a question or a comment via YouTube over at Broadway Sports Media. On YouTube, you can leave any kind of comment there, any questions or comments you might have about the championship weekend that we just watched. Much appreciated. And it allows me to know that we are ready to go on this short episode of the Hot Read podcast. So I'm going to, for those of you that are listening to us live, I'm going to go ahead and start off the episode, start off the recording. We're about 8 minutes in here. I have stalled enough. We're going to get into all things championship weekend, all things Titans news over the weekend, and anything that you might have in terms of a question regarding championship weekend, the NFL, the Titans, or just life in general. We're going to talk about all of that here in about 30 seconds. As I get all of my ducks in a row, we're going to break into the Hot Read podcast. So give me just 1 second and we are ready to go. All right, cool. Here we go. Welcome into the Hot Read podcast for Monday, January the 30th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. Welcome in. Hope everybody had a fantastic weekend, the last weekend of January. I am not joined today by producer JT. He is out and about and a little bit busy this evening. But in the interest of getting an episode out to everybody on every day that we have promised an episode for the next couple of months, which is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, first thing when you wake up and head to work, I am here recording an episode on a Sunday night, very late. It is currently 10:03 p.m. So not the latest episode we've ever done on the Hot Read podcast, but pretty late for our standards. And we're talking about all things championship weekend. I am here on the heels of the AFC Championship. The Chiefs just beat out the Bengals just barely in the AFC Championship in Arrowhead. Now, firmly restored from Burrowhead to Arrowhead because the Chiefs finally got their win over the Bengals, and in particular, Joe Burrow, who had been undefeated against them 3-0 heading into this game. He is now 3-1, the record I believe that Ryan Tannehill holds over the Chiefs, and that is what we're talking about today, all things championship weekend in the NFL. If you're joining us live, I appreciate you tuning in. You can tune in via our Facebook, via our Instagram, our Twitter, via our YouTube. That's where you can leave comments if you're joining us via YouTube. And if you're listening later than live, if you're listening to this as a recording, I just need you to know that this show is a video show. It is live for the most part. Most episodes are live on YouTube when they record. So if you go over to BroadwaySportsMedia.com on YouTube, you can find the Hot Read podcast. All of our video episodes are there for your indulgence, for your viewing pleasure. And a lot of the things that we do on the show are both video and audio oriented. So you can't get the full the full context of the show unless you're watching as well as you're listening. So we appreciate you listening via podcast, wherever you get your favorite podcast, whether that is on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Spotify. But to get the full show, you got to go YouTube, you got to watch, and that's how you appreciate the full show. We appreciate all of you that are tuning in here live, and we're talking just for a couple of minutes on the AFC Championship, the NFC Championship, the NFL Championship weekend that we just experienced, which was an interesting one. And we will start with what was one of the weirdest championship games that I've ever experienced, that I can remember at the very least. That was the NFC Championship today between the Bengals and the 49ers. And I just need to remind you, if you're listening live, if you have any questions or comments, please go over to BroadwaySportsMedia.com, find the Hot Read podcast live stream, and leave your question or comment or just whatever you have to say. Leave it in the comment box. It's very helpful to us, and it allows me to interact with you on the show. If you're ever wanting to interact with the show, now would be the time, because I don't have producer JT with me. I don't have any guests with me. It's just me flying solo tonight, and we're doing a quick show. So if you have any questions or comments for me, please leave them, and I will for sure be interacting with you. But this NFC Championship game was a very, very, very strange one between the Eagles and the Niners. It was not at all what we expected in terms of the game script, with the 49ers losing their quarterback and their very best defensive player in Nick Bosa very early in the game. In the first quarter, the 49ers went down with Brock Purdy and Nick Bosa and Fred Warner. Three of their very best players on the team went down in the first quarter, and it changed the game entirely. And frankly, it was infuriating to me. It was infuriating that we never really got to get a Eagles 49ers game this year in earnest, because the Eagles and the 49ers were really different teams at the beginning of the second quarter. We didn't get the full 49ers team that we were expecting. They were missing their quarterback and their two best defenders by the beginning of the third quarter, and that changed things tremendously. It also kept us from seeing these two teams that I think pretty fairly can be deemed the two best teams in the NFC this year. It kept us from seeing what they would look like against each other in a proper game. It kept us from seeing a full game against those two teams, because really the 49ers, from that first quarter on throughout the rest of the game, they didn't throw the ball much. They had Josh Johnson, who was a Jet last year, who joined the 49ers in I don't know when in December. At some point in December, I believe it was mid-December, he joined the 49ers roster. And it's now January 29th, the 29th of January. He's now starting in the NFC Championship for the 49ers. That has to be a bit of a culture shock. Yeah, he had a couple of 300-yard games last year for the Jets. Yes, he technically had the best passer rating and a lot of the best advanced metrics for the Jets last year as a passer. But he joined this 49ers team last year no more than a month and a half to go. That's really the cutoff for Josh Johnson joining the 49ers. And so that kept them from really being able to carry on this game in the way that they would expect to. I feel bad for Kyle Shanahan. I tweeted out that really maybe the best quarterback situation in the NFL would be Kyle Shanahan in a platoon situation with a closer a closer head coach, because really Kyle Shanahan is fantastic August and September, all the way through the middle to beginning of January, right? And then in the late January, early February stages of things, the very end of the NFL season, he gets pretty questionable. Now, whether it's his coaching style or whether it's his offensive, or his roster situation, And there's arguments to be made there, and it's different every year. But for like a half decade at this point, Kyle Shanahan has just been, his presence has been a bad aura around the team that he is coaching for in the very later stages of the NFL playoffs. Again, if you're joining us live, please leave your comments, questions, reviews via YouTube at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. You can leave your comments, questions, and reviews there. I'd love to interact with you and hear your questions, comments, and reviews on how the NFC or AFC championship went. I'd love to hear your thoughts so we could talk back and forth for a couple of minutes on that. That's what we're talking about today. Kyle Shanahan, rough end of the year for him once again. And we've seen him in championship games and Super Bowls a couple of times now that have not gone his way, to be kind. You had Fred Warner for the 49ers go down in the very first series of this NFC championship game, which frankly, there's nothing worse than that, in my opinion, to have a guy go down at the beginning of a game on the first drive of a game in particular. Totally kills the mood. We're all waiting all day to get these games. And then on the very first play of the game, we get 3 plays before we get commercials again because a player goes down and has to be attended to by medical staff. Like, I'm not blaming that player at all. I'm not. But it's bad and annoying in every possible way for a player to go down on the very first play of these games. And it was, no different in this NFC championship game for Fred Warner to go down on that first series and send us to commercial break and kind of ruin the vibe of championship weekend. Until the AFC championship game, that was kind of the vibe all day, because this NFC championship game was a dud, a total dud. It's befuddling to me how these two teams can't play a proper game with each other in a relatively healthy fashion. It is interesting to me that these two teams got to this point without beating a single great team this year. And then the Eagles are headed to the NFC championship this year, and they've not beat a single great team. Let me real quick pull up the record and the results from Eagles games this year. But I can go ahead and tell you, because I looked at this earlier this week before the game. Eagles schedule 2022. The Eagles have not beat a single great team the entire year. Here's been their schedule. Let me pull it up real quick for you. So the Eagles have played Detroit, Minnesota, Washington, Jacksonville, Arizona, Dallas, Pittsburgh, Houston, Washington, Indianapolis, Green Bay, Tennessee, New York, the Giants, that is, Chicago, Dallas, New Orleans, and the Giants again. So of the teams that they beat, here are the teams that they beat. The Lions, which I'll argue here in just a moment is the best team they beat all year long. Minnesota, Washington, Jacksonville, the Cardinals, the Cowboys, the Steelers, the Texans. And by the way, I should clarify that the Cowboys win is over a backup quarterback Cowboys team, not Dak Prescott Cowboys. So that disqualifies them from being a good team. Otherwise, it would have been a good win. But because they beat a backup, it in my mind disqualifies them from having a good win in that game. The Steelers, the Texans, they lost to Washington. They beat the Colts, the Packers, the Titans, and the Giants and the Bears. All of those are bad teams, in my opinion. And then you got the Giants once again in the playoffs, who they beat pretty handily, which, allows them to have a relatively decent schedule. But again, they've not beaten a good team. For the 49ers part, let me pull up their schedule real quick. They didn't beat a single team all year that was decent until the Cowboys in the playoffs. They beat the Seahawks, the Rams, the Panthers, the Rams again, the Chargers, the Cardinals, the Saints, the Dolphins. That one was a good-ish game, but I believe it was out without Tua. Tampa Bay, the Seahawks again, the Commanders, the Raiders, and the Cardinals. And then in the postseason, they beat Seattle, which was a good team, but not a great team. And then Dallas last week in the divisional round, that was the first good team that they beat. So the Seahawks, goodness, it's late, guys. Can you tell? The the 49ers beat one good team all year, and it was the Dallas Cowboys last week in the division round of the playoffs. The Eagles, for their part, are now headed to the Super Bowl, and have they beat a good team? I don't think that they have. I think their best win all year long was against the Lions in week 1 in Detroit. They won 38-35 by a very thin margin. Now, I think that last score by Detroit was a pretty garbage time touchdown, but nonetheless, it was a close game. And I don't think they have a good win other than that. I know for a fact, looking at their schedule here and following them all year, they've not beat a good team all year. Now, I'm not going to begrudge a team for being lucky. That's not my style. I have forever been of the sentiment that lucky beats good 7 days a week and twice on Sundays. Okay, so being lucky, you should never apologize for being lucky. That's just the way that the world works. It's the way that life works. Sometimes life is unfair. Sometimes life is to your benefit, and you get lucky, and you should relish those opportunities because it's not your fault that you got lucky, and that's just the way that it works. So they got lucky this year. They had a very, very, very easy schedule. And because of that, and because of the fact that, and they earned this, they got the 1 seed in the NFC. They got a bye, and then they got to face the 2 easiest teams left in the NFC side of the bracket in the playoffs. And that allowed them to essentially cakewalk their way to the Super Bowl, to the championship game for the league. And so, good for them, but there is no doubt in my mind, no sliver of a doubt that this is one of the luckiest situations I've ever seen. And watching this game, my thoughts were essentially, I don't know who can watch this game, watch the first 2 series of the NFC Championship game, and root for the Eagles, because objectively it was infuriating, at least to me, to see the Eagles get away with a free 7 points there at the very beginning of the game that they don't deserve. And then the Eagles, the 49ers on their second drive, they lose the ball correctly when the refs fix their mistake. That was gross to me, and that was annoying to me. But as an objective observer of this game, my question really was, why is this happening to us? Because we finally got the NFC playoff game that we'd kind of been hoping for all year. At least I had been hoping for all year, in the 49ers and the Eagles, the 2, I think, clear best teams in the NFC for the majority of the season. We finally got that. And then the 49ers deal with all of this chaos and nonsense and triage that they dealt with at the beginning of this game. And it just ruins it. It ruins it, because you saw their quarterback and their best 2 defenders go down in the first quarter, and it was really never close after that. It was really frustrating. So, we lost Purdy and Bosa and Warner, all of them banged up in the first seemingly 17 seconds of the game. And from there, it was kind of a wrap. I believe the Eagles won 38-17. 38-7. And it was really never a game from there. So those are my thoughts on the NFC Championship. Turning to the AFC Championship side of things, if you've been following the Hot Read podcast this season, then you know that producer JT, who is usually with us, I was with him watching the AFC Championship between the Chiefs and the Bengals. It was a very tight game, one of the better, maybe the best, or I think at the very least the second best playoff game we got this season. Because I have to point out, this year, absolutely, this year's offseason, or postseason rather, was a dud. The NFL's season as a whole was kind of lackluster, but the postseason in particular was a real dud to me. I tweeted out last week during the divisional round of the playoffs that there hadn't been a whole lot of great playoff games this year, and it was making me question whether or not, this year's postseason should kind of be written off maybe as a dud of a year, maybe as a fluke of a year. And I was withholding judgment, but based on today's games, it kind of felt like that may have been the way that things were going. You had the 49ers in their first game playing a game in which I'm sure 49ers fans were essentially feeling the exact same way that Titans fans had felt in Titans fans, at least 3 games this year, where everything is going according to the opponent's plan. You have team members, team players, important team players going down with injuries early and often, and you just cannot buy a break, whether it's on the penalty front, whether it is on the injury front, like things were just breaking all in the Eagles' favor. And so they got a serious break in that department. But it makes you question with to briefly step back to the NFC Championship game. What happened to all of the durable NFL quarterbacks? Like maybe it's crazy recency bias and maybe I'm being fooled right now, and maybe in a month I'll think differently about this. But today, on Sunday, late Sunday evening, as I'm thinking back on these games that we saw today and on these games that we saw in this 2022-2023 NFL postseason, are quarterbacks just less durable than they typically have been? What happened to all of the NFL quarterbacks that could take a licking all year and still, keep ticking, keep playing in the games? Like, I have seen more wobbly, concussed quarterbacks get up from a relatively routine hit this year than I think I ever have. And we saw Josh Johnson go down as well as Brock Purdy today in the NFC Championship game. And it just made me think, what happened, man? For the Niners to lose their third and their fourth quarterback on the entire year, that is brutal, especially in the conference championship game. It's inexplicable. And I don't know how to justify that or to explain it, besides the fact that the 49ers have, frankly, guys, they've had the injury luck that the Titans have had for a couple of years in a row now. So it's not all that off brand, but it's very strange. For the Eagles' part, they got away with that game with a touchdown they weren't really deserving of. They were playing against the team's fourth string quarterback. They somehow, got the NFL's leading defender and maybe second or third leading defender in Nick Bosa and Fred Warner injured in the first quarter and didn't get to see them at full strength. And then they somehow got to see a 49ers team with really not their A or B or C game plan. They kind of had to scramble there at the end. So it was frustrating to see. And those are my thoughts on the NFC Championship. I know, again, I had moved on to the AFC Championship game, but those are my remaining thoughts that I needed to get out. And again, if you're listening to us live, appreciate you being here. Please leave your comments, questions, reviews in the YouTube chat box over at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. If you can go over to Broadway Sports Media on YouTube and leave your questions, comments, or reviews in the live stream of this episode, it'd be very much appreciated. We're talking now about the AFC Championship game, and it was a much closer game than the NFC Championship earlier in the day, but it was a strange game, and one in which, you saw two teams kind of battling back and forth, and it came down to who made more dumb plays than the other team, and that was really the Bengals. They made more really stupid defensive penalties than the Chiefs made, and that was the difference in the game. It allowed what was a 2020 game that seemed pretty destined, to me at least, to be heading towards overtime. It made that game turn into a game where Harrison Butker for the Chiefs was able to end the game in the final seconds, I believe with 8 seconds left on the clock. He put the Chiefs up 3, and that was kind of the end of things. The Chiefs advance to meet the Eagles in the Super Bowl in 2 weeks. They win over the Bengals 23-20. Will be very, kind and considerate to producer JT, who we know is the resident Bengals fan here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com and on the Hot Read podcast. I was with him watching this game. Brutal way to end it. Brutal. Not fair. In terms of thoughts on this game, there wasn't a whole lot besides the fact that I think the Chiefs are going to kind of floss the Eagles. This is a very early and premature take. My take may change over the next 2 weeks as we gear up for this Super Bowl, but I kind of think that the Eagles are going to be outmatched, and I think the Chiefs are going to be representing the AFC in the sense that, listen, the AFC was just a conference that was very, very, very stacked this year and much more talented, really, than the NFC was. And I think that's going to be reflected in this Eagles and Chiefs game. I think that this is a game where you're going to see the two divisions as clearly, the Chiefs had to beat a lot of good teams this year. The Eagles have not beat a single good team this year. And that's kind of going to be the way that things are breaking. In terms of Titans news, I'm looking here at my list since Friday's episode, And there's nothing that's all that pressing in terms of news. So I'm kind of going to choose to leave it out until at least our Wednesday show, which again will be joined by James Foster in 2 days. Wednesday morning, first thing, we'll be doing another draft episode. And, we only have now the Super Bowl. It's the only game left for us on the slate for the NFL. Again, if you're listening live, please leave your comments, questions, reviews. I'm going to be getting out of here in the next 3 or 4 minutes or so. So if you have any last minute thoughts, please leave them now or forever hold your peace. We've got a lot of draft content coming. I've been teasing it for a couple of weeks now, a couple of episodes in a row now on the show. So much cool stuff. So many great episodes with James Foster lined up. So many great episodes where we detail different positions in the NFL draft, different questions from free agency, different questions for the Titans as they go through their offseason with their new GM, Rand Carthon, and Mike Vrabel trying to pretty much retool this Tennessee Titans team, going through different, small school prospects, big school prospects, sleepers, evaluating the very biggest and most highly touted prospects in this NFL draft and seeing if they're over or under hyped. Like I have so many, I have guys, I have notebooks full of different ideas for this show for the next 3-ish months until we get to the draft in April. We're going to have correspondents live with us from the Senior Bowl. I am, spoiler, hoping to be going to the Combine this year live. So hopefully we have a couple of episodes there live this year. Fingers crossed. We will see if the NFL lets me in. I'm trying to bang down the door, kick down the door for BroadwaySportsMedia.com. So we'll see if that happens. But that's kind of the plan. We've got a lot of national and regional different guests that I have planned to come on the show. Guys that you would recognize, guys from maybe the Ringer, maybe the PFF, Fox, ESPN, a lot of really talented folks who know their stuff coming onto the show to talk all things free agency and all things draft over the next 3 months. So please, if you're not subscribed to the show already, please do so. If you haven't left a 5-star rating and review, again, please do so. I know every podcast you've ever listened to has asked you to do that. Please make this the one that you actually do it for. It takes 10 seconds. It means much more to me and to us here at the Hot Read Podcast than it does to you all in the 10 seconds that it takes you to do that. So please do that. Say whatever you want. We'll read it out on the show. On Wednesday, we'll have more of those to read out. And we appreciate you all tuning in. Again, on Wednesday, we will have an episode almost certainly with James Foster talking all things draft. We'll have a new draft episode first thing Wednesday morning. And then on Friday morning, our regular show with me and maybe a guest and producer JT detailing all things Titans news from throughout the week. Until then, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. This has been the Hot Read Podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed championship weekend and hope you all have a fantastic work week. Until Wednesday, I'll talk to you then. This has been the Hot Read Podcast.